Hi, I'm Bisma, and you're listening to The Other C Word, a podcast about all things cancer from a stage 4 breast cancer warrior. We cover health and wellness, mind, body, and soul. Plan to leave each episode with hopefully some new insights and inspiration. Let's get into this week's episode. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to be getting the perspective of a fellow cancer warrior and thriver. I'm thrilled to be joined by Elissa Kalver. Elissa, like me, is living with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And when you talk about making lemonade out of lemons, her journey definitely comes to mind. She is on an empowering mission to help others feel supported and comfortable during their own cancer treatment, on top of managing her own. Elissa has founded a nonprofit called We Got This, which supports cancer thrivers through personalized gift registries. We'll get all into that a little bit later. But first, Elissa, welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So excited to meet you and chat more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really happy that we're going to hear about your journey. So why don't we start off and if you want to just give us a little intro about yourself and maybe even tee it up with like, what was your life like before you got diagnosed? And then I want to hear the whole diagnosis story as well.
Absolutely. So before getting diagnosed, I just celebrated 11 years with my husband, Eric. And my whole career was mainly in sales and financial services. I was a financial advisor and had a short stint of about 4 years running a cardio boxing gym. And I actually got really actively involved in Leukemia Lymphoma Society and team in training the past about, 8 years doing marathons and triathlons and really cool stuff, immersed in the cancer community, which really came back with so much love tenfold when I ended up in this club myself. And it was really interesting. Of course, I have breast cancer, but a lot of my initial support really came from LLS and fellow friends in that. In the early stages where that was really all I knew of people having cancer so close to me. So transitioning a bit, once I had the diagnosis, I feel like I've taken a lot of who I was before cancer and channeled that into this new mission, really kind of bringing in everything I've done throughout my career now and throughout my life in order to do something that really I feel so connected to now. And so I guess getting
That's
into,
amazing.
so I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer July of 2021. So it's just past 3 years
Okay.
now. One
Okay.
day, I had my daughter in July of 2020, and obviously a lot going on at that time. And after I had her, I started having a lot of weird things happening throughout my body. Nothing near my breasts, but things like my feet going numb. I was feeling really off, achy, all sorts of things as I was easing back into like normal life. And I got a lot of things checked out, went to specialists, and essentially, the story, unfortunately, you hear a lot of them kind of dismissing that to the fact that I had had a baby within the year.
Right.
Finally, and I had gone to every specialist. And so I had a breast exam. Everything felt normal. A couple months after that breast exam I had, and again, there was nothing near my breast. It was just, I was checking every box of medical life of my body. My husband jokingly copped a feel one morning when I was getting dressed. Grateful that he's still in love with me that much, and felt something a bit off. And I hadn't felt it before. We didn't feel in the breast exam. And that's when I got it checked out. And it was pretty wild that that lump we hadn't even felt before then ended up being metastatic breast cancer.
That's crazy. So were you breastfeeding during this time?
Not during the time. I
Okay.
had been previously, but hadn't been still. And I'm very grateful at that time, just coincidentally, that I wasn't, because it very much felt like a clogged milk duct.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
think that I would have most likely dismissed it. I
Right.
also would worry that the doctors would have too. It's very hesitant to do scans and things on breastfeeding women.
Yeah.
So my initial thought was, oh, maybe it is like an old clogged milk duct or a cyst. And luckily, I did just message the doctor. I figured easy enough to figure this out. And when I went in, I did not think that I had cancer. Like,
Yeah.
even after they felt the lump in my breast, they felt one in my armpit. And in
Okay.
hindsight, that's not good. But at the time, I had no idea. So they felt it in my armpit as well. We did the mammogram, ultrasound, biopsies. And then it was after that that I got the call that both the biopsies were malignant. And then it wasn't until the PET scan that I found out it had also spread to my liver and my lower spine. And this was the
Oh, wow.
first time of me visually seeing and understanding that, like, I had breast cancer, but more cancer in my liver than I even had in my breast. And that's
Yeah.
where there's just so much that I've learned in the past few years about metastatic breast cancer that I never would have understood. And it still is kind of counterintuitive to what we would think of,
Yeah.
that I don't have liver cancer, I have breast cancer that had spread to my liver.
Right. Yeah, there's so much confusion around that. I know. So when I got diagnosed, they just told me you have metastatic cancer. And so they had to go back and figure out where it was originating from. And I didn't even know what the word metastatic meant. So I was like, I thought it was a type of cancer. And so mine had spread to my spine. So I was like, maybe it's a cancer of the spine or like a bone cancer. So it took me like some education to understand like that just means that it's spread and you have to figure out where it's come from. But in your situation, they biopsied the lump in your armpit first and figured out it was breast cancer. And then they saw the liver and the spine.
Yeah, so the breast
Yeah.
and the armpit. So kind of knowing that it was originating from the breast,
Yeah.
and got back then that it was HER2 positive, ER and PR negative, and
Interesting.
and with metastatic, like you're saying, I started looking at Facebook groups and other things to start learning about stuff that was happening, and
Yeah.
seeing people say things like, "I had Mets here, Mets in my bone." I'm like, "What are Mets?"
Yeah.
I didn't understand what any of it was, and I try to
Right.
remember that as we talk about it now, because I remember I didn't know what that was 3 years ago. Most
Yeah.
people who don't have to know what it is probably don't either.
Yeah. I thought people were saying nets. I was like, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. It honestly was like also weird and confusing.
Yeah, you're like, "Are we
Um,
playing basketball after or what?"
yeah. Exactly. What did you do you remember, like, how did you feel emotionally? Like, what was going through your head at that time? You just, like, had your daughter and, like, seems like, a brand new chapter of life. Like, what did you feel?
It was, of course, shocking, but I had gone through this whole year of feeling like something was wrong. And
Mhm.
so I felt not crazy anymore. I felt like validated, but I wish I wasn't validated in that way. So it was a lot of
Right.
really confusing feelings. When I got the phone call of the initial biopsy results, it was really surreal because it was the radiologist who did the biopsies wasn't in that day, which I kind of knew in advance. She had warned me of that I might get the results. And I remember saying after the biopsies, like, do you have any hunches or that? I mean, I really didn't think I had cancer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was like, yeah, I don't like to make any assumptions, or say, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't have cancer. But
Right.
now looking back, it's like, oh, she totally knew that I did.
She knew and
Um,
just couldn't say it. Yeah.
Now I know because, they tell us a little bit more now that we're like more veteran cancer people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the time, I remember I picked up the phone. I was doing my makeup for a work meeting I had at the time. And I remember just kind of looking at myself in the mirror, as in like talking to the radiologist. And I remember him saying both the biopsies came back, and unfortunately, they were malignant.
Mhm.
And I just like paused and was like, "So are you telling me that I have breast cancer?" And he's
Right.
like, "Yes." And he didn't have any other information at that time. So it was
Yeah.
literally just getting a phone call. It was a Friday. So I
Mhm.
knew that if I didn't get more information by the end of the day, I wasn't going to till Monday.
Right.
So I really pushed hard to find out more. Luckily, I have people in my family and circle of friends in the medical field who kind of told me which questions to push and ask for. So I
Yeah.
was able to get on the phone with the surgeon. I was with Kaiser at the time, and they have you meet with the surgeon before the oncologist,
Okay.
which doesn't make too much sense to me, especially
Yeah.
since I've never met her again and I've never needed a surgeon since.
Yeah. I
But
haven't heard that before.
yeah, it was kinda odd, but she was great, and she
Okay.
answered a lot of my questions, and that was when I found out when she called me back a few hours later. I remember it was on speaker, my mom was visiting at the time, we had been running out to run an errand when she called, and it was when she said, like, "We're gonna do more tests and scans, but, we'll for sure start off with about, 6 to 8 rounds of chemo. It'll be about, a few months." And that's when everything was like, "Oh, like, I, like, have cancer." Like, not that it's
Yeah.
not if not, it's just, like, all the stereotypes that you picture and see, like, that started flooding into my mind and
Yeah.
realizing that this is something that is totally, of course, life changing no matter what. But then it wasn't until we saw the PET scan results and all the lights up when I'm like, am I dying?
Yeah.
These are things that, and then after my initial chemo, about 4 months in with Herceptin and Perjeta, I ended up having a recurrence in my breast and in my brain. And again, you're like, am I dying? Like, these are things that we hear in life. And depending on the type of cancer and the situation, it's
Right.
so different. I've never understood how vague the word cancer is until having
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, like you're giving me chills, like saying this. Like it's just really, like I can like totally picture myself in how you're describing it and the scenario, and it's just the word cancer is weird because like for me, like what's like before having cancer, you just hear of like people get cancer and people get better. You hear that, and then you also hear people die from cancer, right? So you hear both sides of the spectrum. And then I think when you get diagnosed and you don't have an early stage diagnosis, you have a late stage diagnosis, it's so scary, right? Because like it does feel like I mean people only die from stage 4, right? So that is obviously a very normal natural thought is that am I going to die? And I feel like doctors try to shield you from the truth, right? Because they want to be positive and they're like, no, we've got these treatments and like we're going to do this. But I mean, at the end of the day, they don't know how you're going to respond to it. And so I think that fear of like, am I going to die is like very normal and natural. And sadly, just, it is that's a scenario that you're in.
I think that's such a great point too that you said with that they're trying to like be careful and they don't know how you're going to react. So sometimes you don't know, like, are you putting on kid gloves for me or is this
Right.
okay? And after having brain mets,
Yeah.
using the word mets, but after having those and being treated so quickly for them and having as much of a complete response as I could have right now in my brain, it's unbelievable to me. Like, I didn't have brain surgery. Like, through
Right.
chemo, the fact that that can be treated, like, I hope that more people can know that. Because I think that a
Right.
lot of people get so scared about getting tested because of what the results might be, and
Yeah.
having the results not be good and having them feel like something that I normally would have thought I would, like, die from, but it was something
Yeah.
that was able to be really well treated, and I very much live my life now and all that. Like, that's something I wouldn't have known before.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, your outlook on it is like I followed you on Instagram for a while, I think probably since I got diagnosed, and it's just
Okay.
really inspirational. I just think you like obviously it's like such a heavy disease and diagnosis to live with, but your attitude around it is really inspirational, just really amazing.
Aw, thanks. Well,
Um
likewise, and all the conversations you have, and the more that people talk, you realize that it's like a fingerprint. We're all so different.
yeah,
And even, I mean, I haven't met anyone with like exact scenarios, but even
right.
when you meet people where you can relate on a lot of things, I learn so much every conversation I have with someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. So your receptors are your estrogen progesterone negative and then HER2 positive, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so when you and so I'm the opposite. So I'm estrogen, progesterone positive, HER2 negative.
Well, opposites
Um,
attract, you know?
yes. How did you feel when you heard that? Because I guess like I don't know, like I feel like people are like, oh, like that's a good one and that's a bad one, and did you have any thoughts like that? Like, oh, I have a targeted one, or I have an like, what did you feel?
So initially, one of the relatives that I spoke to, because HER2 positive did not have a lot of treatments not that long ago. So I was
Right.
kind of told I had a really, really bad one. And then, you start learning more and realizing that there are a lot of targeted therapies. So like I'm grateful in the bad scenario that there's targeted therapies to have. I
Yeah.
was confused that it wasn't hormone positive. I grew up
Right.
with endometriosis, so I've been on birth control and treated for endometriosis since middle school.
Hmm.
And I was kind of surprised, like, that it wasn't hormone related. It didn't None of it makes sense, right? And I also have no
Yeah.
family history. It's just I don't have BRCA, no genetic mutation.
Right.
So I was more so just confused by what all of it meant. And then as I learned more, I think it still ends up being kind of confusing because when people say things like, this is good or this is bad, and then you see someone who passes away from the thing that someone said was the good one.
Yeah.
And you start feeling like, Of course, we know that it all sucks. It's just even the scenarios where you feel like, oh, maybe this is better or this is, I think we always have to remind ourselves that we're all unique and different. And having the right care team and the people to understand that and treat us like that, I think is ultimately the most important thing, to not categorize ourselves by those different categories.
Yeah, totally. I think so many of us get like caught up in the stats, right? So like you're like, okay, so I've got this type of cancer and like the stats say this, so like I'm going to be in this bucket. But like there's so many variances within each of the categories. And so, you know, even like my oncologist will tell me like we just don't know. You just have to kind of like stay positive and like we got to just make sure that we're putting you in the right treatments in the right order, and then you kind of just, do the most that you can that's in your control as well. Um
Yeah, my initial oncologist, and I pushed to get stats. So it was like, because I'm like, am I dying? Like, what is happening?
yeah.
And I was like, can I just get an idea of like where this is at and what you're trying to tell me? And
Yeah.
so she was kind of giving me the stats. And she's like, 20% make it past 5 years, while the average is 18 to 24 months. That's very outdated. And she said, they'll always remember, she said, I have patients that are 6 to 7 years out. And I'm like, I am 34. I'm 37. I was 34 at the time. Like, were you just trying to encourage me by telling me that I'm going to live to 40?
Yeah.
Like, it stuck with me so much. And then I'm not at Kaiser anymore, and
Okay.
I am treated at UCLA. I have unbelievable oncologists. I had Dr. Sarah Hurvitz initially. She went on to do more research, and my oncologist now, Dr. Lipsick Sharf, is wonderful. And I
Yeah.
remember when I moved over to Dr. Hurvitz and her being like, no, no, no. Like, you're in the golden age of HER2 positive breast cancer, and we're going
Yeah.
to keep you alive so that we can keep having more treatments for you to stay alive. And like
Yeah.
the plan is for this to be a chronic disease, not a terminal one. And
Right.
that like made me feel like, okay, regardless of if we're at that point yet or not, I want to be with the care team who believes that and like is a
Exactly.
part of figuring that out.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, so yeah, I was 35 when I got diagnosed, and they told me 50% chance of making it to 40 or making it 5 years. And I was like, and they were saying it like a good thing almost. Like, okay, so like you've got 5 years probably. And I was like, that's only till 40. Like that's so young. And that's really not like a goalpost, right? Like that's just not, it's not enough life. And so I've met with other oncologists and other doctors and, gotten told, those are old stats. Like that's not the data. Like we're not even quoting data anymore because like the treatments being used now just haven't been around long enough to know how they're going to do. And it's just really, it's hard because you want to, like, we're data people, right? So I remember actually I had asked the hospital at that time. I said, I want to see the actual data. Like, give me like the Excel spreadsheet. I want to see, like, obviously, like, blur out the names, but I want to see, like, how old these people are, like, what's their prior history. And they were like, no, we don't give out that data. It's just not like that. But I wanted to know, like, where do I actually fall within this data group and not just here's an average. Um, but yeah, it's really crazy. So it sounds like you had a really good support system around you. Can you talk to us a little bit about, family, friends, and how did that play into your support?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very grateful and lucky to have such a great support system. And I think a lot of that, like your first question, is they thought about the old Alyssa and knew who I was going to be with cancer a bit in terms of my personality. So when I started bringing up, crazy ideas and things I wanted to do throughout chemo, the people who really know me didn't bat an eye, and then they knew
Right.
that that's I was doing it, so they had to hop on board, or I was going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then I'm referring to, starting my nonprofit and other things throughout. But when I was first diagnosed, the biggest thing was everyone was asking how they can help and what they could do. And it's this such a special thing to know that you have so many people who want to help you. And that's what I think made it feel like something I needed to find a solution for, because it shouldn't feel like this unintentional burden. Like, it shouldn't be a negative thing that so many people want to help us. And it did feel that way because had so much to respond to, and I didn't want to ask for help, and I wanted them to know how much I appreciated that they cared. And then I thought about the year earlier when I had my daughter and using baby lists, or when I was
Mm.
getting married and having a wedding registry, and
Right.
I didn't feel comfortable having a GoFundMe for myself. And my good friend Amber, who now works with me at We Got This, she actually did meal train for us. And
Mm.
she put in the notes, like, if you really want to make them a meal, like, let me know and I'll help coordinate. She's like, but it would really be most helpful if you just sent gift cards because, I couldn't taste for weeks at a time. I didn't know what diet I was going to follow, all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
so everyone sent gift cards, it really was unbelievably helpful because our kitchen was gutted at the time when I was
Right.
diagnosed. We were doing construction on our house, so I didn't have a kitchen. And it was really from that I was like, there really should be a gift registry for cancer patients. A lot happened in between that, of course, but it was
Yeah.
my like fifth round of chemo when I was just like, this sucks. And what am I doing with it? And I need to do something. And that's when the idea kind of came about to bring in the community of supporters that want to help. And of course, my primary caregiver being my husband, who that initial time, and I talked about this before, that we were in the office when we saw the PET scan, and you see visually on the screen, just they explain to you that like anything lit up could be cancer. And it was just like a sea of lights. And
Yeah.
that was when my husband just went white, and he was like, had to breathe into a paper bag. It was like really having a panic attack. And we had no idea how to channel all of this. And ever since then, he's just like, he got it all out of his system. And now he's just really rolled with the punches and been a part of every step with me the way that I wanted to handle it. The
Yeah.
biggest turning point, I think, being when I did have the brain mets and I was on Enhertu and tucatinib as a part of a clinical trial, and I just really lost my quality of life. And it worked so well, but making that decision to make a change was something that my husband and my parents, people closest to us supported. And I know that that was really hard for them to support me moving off of a treatment that was working. And
Right.
because of that, I've gone into really live the past 2 years, whereas even though it was working, it wasn't working for me and my quality of life. And having
Right.
the people around you care about all of you, not just them getting to be with you, is something that I've learned. Because I think on the flip side, I would have felt like you need to just keep going, like
Yeah.
just keep doing this because I need you here. But
Right.
being willing to take that chance with me and support me through that was a huge part of my support team.
Yeah, that's amazing. Totally think that our family really just, they want us to be around, right? And so that's their biggest goal. But, I think it's like to what extent, right? If you're just miserable and you're not really functioning, then how is that, you really being around? So that's amazing that your family was supportive and your husband was supportive about you getting off of that treatment. How did it go telling your oncologist that? Like did they take it light? I mean, did they try to encourage you to stay back on it?
No, and I actually in my head, I was like, "Why didn't I mention this sooner?" Because when I did finally, I just got to that point. It was like each round, my husband and I would talk, and I'd be like, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Like, I couldn't wake up without throwing up. That I was
Yeah.
taking medicine to stay asleep all day. Like, I literally wasn't living other than maybe like up to 5 to 7 days every 3 weeks in between
Right.
infusions. So I'd brought it up a little bit earlier. We couldn't lower the dose because of the fact that I was a part of a clinical trial. So even though both drugs were FDA approved, combining them for breast cancer was the trial. And I
Got
really
it.
wanted to stay on that because, again, I had brain tumors and it was working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I finally did like say to my oncologist, like, I don't know that I want to live like this. Like I
Mhm.
wake up and I think to myself, like, living is too hard. Like, I don't know that I can keep doing this. And she's like, well then, like, this isn't working. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, it's like working like on the cancer, but like that's only half of it. Like you're a human. Like you need to live too. She's like, if you
Right.
feel that drastic about this, like we need to change it. And I didn't realize how many options. I knew that more options existed, right? But I always kind of thought of it like a cat with 8 lives and you're like knocking off a life.
Yes, I feel the same way.
Right? And
Yeah.
And that was when she was like, you can stay a part of the study if you want, but why don't we switch drugs? And that's when I switched to what I've been on now, which is Xeloda, tucatinib, and Herceptin. And that
Okay.
was kind of comforting that two of the drugs are things I had already had.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I'm so grateful that that was her reaction. And then she kind of left it to me of being like, this is something you can do now. So you just tell me, like, do you want to try doing this longer because it's working? Do you want to just stop? And it was towards the end of the year. And I was like, I'm going to start the new year trying to take my life back. And
Yeah.
like, I am forever grateful that I did.
Yeah.
The past couple years, what I've gotten to do and live is amazing. I do have a little bit of a potential recurrence right now in my left breast, but we're working through it and figuring it out and knowing that there's options like that. Like I knew that, right? Like we kind of get told that, but you
Right.
don't really feel that until your medical team and your support system are like on that train with you. And so
Yeah.
now that we've done that, I'm like, okay, I do believe now that I have options.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think I always kind of have this. I mean, I'm just an anxious person in general, but I think I definitely, with this, like my anxiety peaks in the sense like, I want to know how many options. Like, am I on option like 3 of 5 or is it 3 of 30? Like, what's the number? And like, you don't really get a clear answer, but like, there are so many options. There's so many different combinations of drugs that you can take. And so I think, where we are or like where medicine is with metastatic breast cancer right now, like there are a lot of options. And so I think the goal is really to stay hopeful. And also I think to your point, it's like if something's not working for you, like you should talk to your cancer care team and let them know that you're miserable, because I don't think like that really isn't the goal. Like what your oncologist said, like it's just because it's working on the cancer doesn't mean it's working overall for you.
And if she had said to me, like, Alyssa, you might die if we stop, like, if she was
Yeah.
really concerned, I would have reevaluated maybe the way I looked at it. Maybe
Right.
if I knew that that was my only option, maybe I would have been grateful for that 5 to 7 days every 3 weeks that I lived, and you reset maybe what you think that bar is. But
Yeah.
knowing that like didn't even hesitate that this isn't how I had to live, thank God I spoke up. And I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing. She just didn't fully get how much I was struggling.
Yeah.
And that's also cuz I try not to. Like I want to be happy and live. But
Yeah.
yeah, speaking up is important, just like speaking up if you feel something that's off.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like I've gotten better about this, but I think initially I was not scared of my oncologist, but a little bit like, okay, like I want to be a really good patient and like, listen to everything they're saying. But I think I've kind of learned that, we're on a team together, me and the oncologist. It's not them, telling me what to do. It's them telling me options of what I can do. And then it's my decision at the end of the day what I want to do with it.
Yeah, my oncologist, Dr. Hurvitz at the time was director of clinical trials for UCLA. And so
Mhm.
every time I'd be offered something, I would always have the option of a clinical trial. Like after I got off of Enhertu and tucatinib, I was offered to be on a clinical trial for something else. And reviewing it, it didn't feel like as good of a fit for me. So I chose not to do it. But
Yeah.
having those options really helps. I felt like in general, having a medical team where they recommend something or they give you those options. And while I always still have more conversations and do more research, in general, I like really trust my team. So
Yes.
initially, I didn't. And when they would say things or offer things, I'd kind of feel like I'd need to do so much more research because not that like I didn't trust them, but I didn't feel like I had all the resources at my disposal. And
Right.
now that I do, it makes it a lot easier to feel like, okay, I want to be the good patient. I want them to love me, but also want to like make the choice that feels best. And having the choices laid out for you already give you the confidence that like who's giving them really cares and understands the full spectrum of what's available. It
Yeah.
has like changed that perception for me.
Yeah, I think that's really important. When you were at Kaiser, did you ask like, are you guys part of any clinical trials? Do you have any connection to them, or was that not something that was on your radar at that point?
So the initial chemo felt really straightforward to me. So it
Okay.
didn't feel like that was necessary. But even given that, so like I started out with TCHP, so it was Taxotere, Carboplatin, Herceptin, and Perjeta. And then when I didn't get a second opinion at first. I did, like I made phone calls and things. But what happened being in the heat of COVID and so much else going on, I actually started chemo before I met my oncologist.
Oh,
It
wow.
was very out of the ordinary. But if I wanted to wait to meet the oncologist, I was going to have to wait an additional month for chemo. And I
Mm.
just wasn't willing to do that. So I started the first few rounds with TCHP. And then once the dust kind of settled, I actually got a second opinion within Kaiser. And I ended up switching oncologists within Kaiser. And I really liked my second oncologist. If I didn't have the opportunity at UCLA to switch, I would have been happy with her.
Okay.
She immediately switched my chemo to THP. She's like, "You
Mm.
don't need carboplatin. Your cancer's not curative. Like, we don't need to blast you harder than necessary." And it's not like adding in the carboplatin was like gonna kill me, but I was throwing up more. I was having a lot more severe symptoms. And
Yeah.
like even that little tweak made me realize early on, like this matters. Like who's helping you matters. That my original oncologist wasn't up to speed on like the current golden standard of care. What
Right.
she prescribed me was fine. It wasn't like malpractice or anything. It's just, it
Right.
wasn't necessary. I also think that the initial oncologist took my direction as a patient like too much, like didn't
Oh,
fully
okay.
educate me.
Right.
So I go in, right? Like I'm a former athlete, and all of like, hit me with whatever we got. Like, take my
Yeah.
breasts, do whatever you have to do. Like, let's go
Yep.
as aggressive as possible. And then you learn, like, oh, removing my breasts isn't going to benefit me for metastatic breast cancer and
Yeah.
all that. But I think that she took so literally my like willingness that she made it as aggressive as it could be. And I think she said that after when I did switch, I was like, why do we add that if not? She's like, you said you wanted to be aggressive. And I felt like I wasn't given
The full information.
the lay of the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's like I'm sure you do too. I get asked so many questions that like on constant or on repeat. One of them is definitely like, why don't they take the original lump out? Like, why don't you have surgery? Like, since mine is hormone driven, I'm on hormone targeted treatment instead of just like IV chemo overall right now. And
Hmm.
so I get a lot of those questions. And it's a lot of educating people on, that's not how it's done. But it also, those are valid questions. And it's still hard to grasp that with metastatic, you taking out the original source is not going to overall like systemically help your cancer. If it's already spread, you have to treat the body as a whole. Did you have trouble grasping that concept yourself initially, that you weren't going to have a surgery to remove the tumor?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And yeah, I can so relate to everything that you're saying. And initially, when it was explained to me, I was like, okay, I understand. Like, we can't remove part of my spine, we can't remove my whole liver. Like,
Yeah.
that piece made sense. And then recently, like just a few months ago, when we found more tumors in my left breast that ended up being the same cancer, that's when I was like, okay, so do we remove my breast now? Like it's contained, should we remove
Yeah.
them? And even my oncologist was like, let's have you meet with the surgeon and let's talk it out. And so I did, and she was like, again, from your scans, like there's a lot of little tumors in there. Like, so if we did a lumpectomy, what are we taking out? Are we taking out all of those? Like, we can't, do you want to do biopsies on all those? Like, and then I was like,
Right.
well, can we just remove them? And she's like, if we remove them, the amount of time that you're going to have to pause your chemo right now is so much more dangerous than cancer in your breast. And it
Right.
was such a good reminder of, and I messaged Dr. Toplinsky about this, if you follow her as well
Mhm.
and love
Yeah.
her. And I was like, can you help me articulate this? Because I'm answering it so much. She was like, absolutely. So we did a post together about it. And
Yeah.
even watching her explain it, which again, I was the one who reached out to ask her to explain, like I still needed that reminder. And like I still
Yeah.
do. I sometimes
Yeah.
look back to it because I'm like, yes, that's why. Like we can't remove my brain.
Right.
And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, if I'm not going to die from cancer in my breast, then why risk the rest of my body getting infiltrated?
Yeah. No, I think that's an important point. So it's like if you're listening in, and the clarification I think is like, so when you have a surgery, you have to stop your chemo or your hormone treatments, whatever other treatments you're on, because your immune system needs that time to recover from the surgery, and you can't double up on doing chemo and a surgery at the same time. So you would be off of your systemic treatment while you're recovering from surgery. And a lot of times the thought process there is like that time off of your treatments is more problematic and more, bad for your body than taking out that tumor. And so it's, it's just something I have to remind myself of as well.
Yeah, me too. Like even saying it, I'm like, yeah, 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 don't do that.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing you posted about having back pain. I know I messaged you
Yeah.
about that, and that's been on and off an issue for me throughout
Mhm.
treatment. And it's something most recently that I mean, we did like I was in MRIs for like 3 hours to do all the parts of my back. We just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure, like 100%, there's no cancer there, and there's not.
Yeah. That's
But
awesome.
which is great news.
Yeah.
But it's still like a debilitating symptom, which I think might have to do with my endometriosis growing back now that I'm
Okay.
not treating that. And
Yeah.
so I am voluntarily scheduling a hysterectomy, leaving my ovaries since I don't need to go through early menopause since I'm not hormone positive.
Okay.
And that's something that I wanted to do a couple years ago. That with the brain tumors, they were like, let's not do elective surgeries. But
Yeah.
that's where, like, weighing things out. So, like, the hysterectomy would be just a couple weeks off of, probably just missing the tucatinib, wouldn't even maybe even have to miss my chemo pill, I wouldn't have to miss Herceptin. But
Yeah.
that's where, like, having those conversations, that was something we said, would it make sense a couple years ago? I brought up again, and we kinda talked it through, and it could make sense now. So, like,
Right.
also not being afraid to ask those questions. Like, even me asking again, like, "Should I just do a double mastectomy now?"
Yeah.
What did it take off our time, right? An extra appointment for me to totally understand it and feel comfortable again.
Yeah. Absolutely. So have you made a decision yet on do you want to go forward with the hysterectomy or are you still considering that?
I have decided to go forward with it.
Okay.
It's just a timing thing. I'm trying to do it sooner than later because we're also waiting to do another breast MRI to
Okay.
I'm on like pause with we don't want to change my treatment because everything else is working. Like my brain mets
Right.
aren't growing back. There's nothing in my liver anywhere else. So they're honestly just a little confused, like why more grew in my breast. And I think that they were kind of expecting it to look different. Maybe it would be
Right.
hormone positive or different breast cancer.
Right.
And since it's also HER2 positive, it's confusing. And my options were like that we could do a breast MRI guided biopsies
Mhm.
or wait. And the surgeon was like, honestly, I really don't want to put you through the breast MRI biopsies for us to probably just find out the same info again.
Yeah.
So in a month, I'm getting another breast MRI. So I think once we do that, we'll just evaluate the timing and make sure I don't need to be like urgently switched to something. But for now,
Okay.
I'm continuing
Got it.
on my current chemo and it's working everywhere else. So they feel comfortable that, like, other than this one weird question mark, that like I am mostly stable and it's
Okay.
working.
Good. Good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing that just popped in. So for my back, so I have metastases all over my spine, all over my pelvic bones, my rib cage, sternum. It's like literally my entire yeah. So when you talk about scans lighting up, like when I get mine and the screens there, it's just like all lit up. But one thing I do get on a monthly basis is this injection called Xgeva. Have you heard of that?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so it's like this bone strengthening agent, and it helps like if there is like weakness, like fracture or like fractures possibly coming or metastases in your bone. So I wonder for you if that's an option.
Yeah, I should look into
Um,
that. What's the other
yeah,
infusion I mean, sorry, bone medicine? Oh my god, I'm blanking. I get it like
is
every
it
few months.
Zometa or something?
Zometa, yeah.
Zometa, yeah,
Is
okay.
that similar or different injection?
It's similar. I think it's the same like base ingredient. So yeah, if you're getting that, has that do you have you noticed any difference in your bones from that or no?
I've been getting it the whole time.
Okay.
So, yeah, so the pain I've been getting, I don't know, it feels more muscular, like but I know the difference, like, and I was doing physical therapy for so long and all that, and it wasn't
Yeah.
fixing it. But
Yeah.
I'll definitely ask about that too. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you so you're I also used to work out a ton before I got diagnosed. It's something that I miss doing because I used to go to like high intensity classes and do like boxing and do all of that. So I've had to, change how I do my workouts now. But I like really do believe like to help with that bone pain if you can like strengthen the muscles around it. that can really help alleviate like the weight that goes on your bones. Have you found like any like particular types of workouts that you have found beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, definitely boxing, because it also helps, of course, like, strengthening my core and all that for my back,
Yeah.
and I've always liked boxing, I had a boxing gym, and also I just feel like it's such a low risk unless you're actually fighting, but it's a low
Right.
risk workout, like,
Yeah.
you're getting cardio with strength training, from the
Yeah.
resistance. I also have gone really into golf since being diagnosed. I used to
Oh,
play
okay.
tennis a lot, and I still play tennis, but it was very high impact, like, really well, starting chemo and getting used to all that. It kind of is. But with golf, like really moving my body and being
Mhm.
outdoors for a long time and all of that, I've found to be really helpful as well.
Oh, okay, awesome. My husband's a big golfer, so maybe I'll join him
Yeah, let me
doing
know. I'll
it.
come up north and we can all
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So, one thing that I've, like, seen on your social media is, like, you use the word thriver instead of, like, living with or, like, just surviving. I wanna hear a little bit about, like, your mindset. What makes you wanna use that word and, like, embrace the cancer versus and treat it, like, more like a chronic illness than just being, like, a terminal diagnosis?
I first heard the term thriver mainly like through Medivivor and metastatic patients, talking about it. And I thought about the word survivor and thriver together. And before having cancer, if someone would like ask how your day's going or something like that, you'd be like, oh, it's all right. Like I'm surviving. I never felt like survival was my goal as a human without cancer. And so I felt like making that the accomplishment with cancer was minimizing us as humans. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm not offended by the word survivor, anything like that. It's just not my goal. Like, it wasn't my
Yeah,
goal before cancer. It's not my goal now. Like, I hope that I'm alive. Like, that's bare minimum. But to
right.
actually live life, that's where I feel like that's where I identify more with thriving because I feel that. And I really felt that when I was on Enhertu, and I felt like I didn't know how I could continue to live. I knew that I wasn't dying because it was working so well on my cancer, but I also was really in touch with the fact that I wasn't living. And
Yes.
being in touch with that and embracing the fact that that is just as important was so important for me to get to live again. So that's why I really just think that living with cancer, thriving, not just staying alive and surviving, is really the goal. There are
Yeah.
definitely days where I'm just surviving, right?
Yeah.
Like we all are. So, like, I always try to stress, like, you don't have to start a nonprofit during chemo. Like, you don't have, like, it would have been fine if I just wanted to learn how to golf and golf every day, like,
Yeah.
do what makes sense and feels good for you. But I hope that people, value themselves enough to not take, other people's pressure or perception of cancer and minimize whatever it is that they want to live in their life.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like it's such a personal journey. I know like the first year I had metastatic, I would say I was just like trying to survive. I was just trying to get through and I didn't really want cancer to define me. Like I didn't really see myself as being someone that was going to be like I've got cancer and like I'm doing, X, Y, and Z. I just didn't think that was like a part of my personality. And then something hit around like the 1 year mark where I don't know if it was like this real fear set in of like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. I already switched treatments a couple of times. And I think I just had this like wake up moment where I was like, I have to do something. I have to do something beyond just like the minimum to get by. It was more than just like doing my treatments. Like I needed to just take a little bit of control and be more proactive in my healing journey. And that's where I started doing a lot more like I started meditating a lot. I started looking a lot more into like my diet, nutrition, exercises and doing more advocacy stuff and connecting with people in the community. And I think that shift over the last like this past year now, it's like I feel like I'm thriving now because I'm just more, a part of it. I'm embracing it and I'm not just trying to get by anymore.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any
Yeah.
terms that like you don't like in particular or like more than others in that realm of the thriving, surviving stuff?
So I think, yeah, thriving, survive, like those are fine. I think one thing that really always irks me, and I don't know if you feel this way, is that when people are like, be strong, like I just don't really to me, it's like a really silly thing to say. It's like, we don't really have a choice. Like, I have to just get through this. And so I think when people are like, stay strong, be strong, or I also don't really love when people like keep fighting. I think that one for some reason irks me as well. What about for you? Or do any of those resonate?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I've kind of taken this lens of like, I feel like not everything has to be a teaching moment. So, like, I've had people say some pretty messed up things, like,
Yeah.
especially when you're bald and you don't have a choice of whether or not people know you have cancer.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when like friends, I'll tell it to, they'll be like, "Why didn't you say something?" I'm like, "Because I didn't want to. Like, I didn't want to have that conversation. So, like, I wasn't gonna do it to
Yeah.
myself." But the biggest thing is like I've made this whole thing around the mission of we got this. So I do think it's funny, and if anyone did this, it's like not a big deal. Nothing offends me, but it's funny when people will still comment sometimes on some of my posts or say to me in person, like, "You're so strong. You got this." And,
Yeah.
that, like, to me is just funny because,
Yeah.
especially when it's, like, very well-intentioned people and people who
Yeah.
I
Of
know,
course.
like, really support what I'm doing in my mission, but, like, that's
Yeah.
the biggest thing with "We Got This" is, like, it's not meant to be corny, like, I truly feel it wholeheartedly that
Yeah.
I would always say, "I got this." Like, when I was
Right.
diagnosed and I was telling like, when I had to tell my husband at first because I got the call, like, by myself, and I'm like, "It's okay, like, I got this. Like, I'll do whatever I have to do."
Yeah.
And it felt so weird saying that. And then people saying, "You got this," it's like kind of removing themselves, like, "You got it."
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's okay. Not everyone like has to be actively on my team, but
Right.
I think it's a we thing. To me, it just feels much better. So I just think it's funny because
Yeah.
like that's been my thing. So when people mess it up, it's like when people reply to an email and they
Yeah.
spell your name wrong, which I'm sure
Yeah.
happens to you, like it does to me. It's like, no,
Yeah.
it's right there. Like my email is literally
It's literally right
Elissa.
there for you. Yeah. I also feel like it depends, like, what day or, like, what time of the day you catch me. Like, it maybe just be, like, a well-intentioned comment, but, like, if I'm not feeling good and someone's, like, says something like that to me, then I'm just like, "Ugh, like, that's not what I wanna hear right now." But, like, another day where I'm, like, feeling fine and, like, out and about, I'll be like, "Oh, yes, like, I can do this too." So, it just really it depends, and I think it's always important to remember, like, people are well-intentioned, and so, just don't always know the right thing to say at the right time.
Yeah. I think that we're really conditioned to feel like we need cures for things.
Mhm.
And that's something that I really feel a lot is like, I don't mind, opinions on nutrition and fitness. Like, that's been a huge part of my life, like forever.
Yeah.
But what does bother me is seeing things like posts or like when celebrities come out with certain alternative things. Some can be good, some not. And it's very misleading on that, like, not everything has to cure cancer. Like, we don't just need to eat healthy because it'll prevent or cure cancer. Like,
Yeah.
there's also things we can do because we wanna, like, live comfortably and, like,
Yeah.
like, if, like, you don't have to do cardio to have fat loss, but you might wanna do cardio to, like, have a healthy heart.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
like, finding the and, not the or, like,
Yes.
I do chemo, I take meds if I need them, but I also go to acupuncture regularly for my back too.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one or the other, like, we can do multiple things and both can be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm like big into like juicing, right? Like I have a blender full of like juice like throughout the day. And people then you read some posts and people are like, "Oh, like that's all like garbage, like it's not going to cure your cancer." And I'm like, I don't think it's curing my cancer, but I know it's making me feel better. And like if my immune system is stronger, I think that overall is going to help me fight whatever disease it is that I have. And so I think it's like you don't have to look for the cure, quote unquote, but just find things that make you feel good. And if you're physically feeling better and mentally feeling better, that's overall going to help you with whatever's going on in your body.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I love juicing too.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, like, quit chemo and only juice, just, like, personally,
Right.
that's not what I
Same.
think will keep me alive, but I
Yeah.
definitely love having juice, it makes me feel good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So I want to get into your nonprofit. Tell us, like, you spoke a little bit about like when you were going through chemo and you were thinking through like what would be helpful for you. What was kind of like that pivotal point that you were like, I'm going to actually start an organization and get this out there?
I started looking into everything that already existed. So, it's like, if something like this exists, I don't wanna recreate the wheel, I don't wanna cause any competition or anything, I'll just help with that. And when I realized that nothing like it did exist, that's when I felt like really mission driven, like, okay, this should. And how often do we really find something that we see such a need for that there's nothing like it? There was something similar at the time that doesn't exist anymore, but it was like a registry for cancer patients, for profit, run by doctors,
Mm.
selling stuff in their own inventory for like medical supplies. And it was really seeing that I was like, this really needs to exist. Because that platform, the way that they did it, which again doesn't even exist anymore because it didn't work, it felt
Yeah.
so predatory to me. Like, trying to sell things and the perception of it and all this stuff. And so did a lot of research into it. And there are lots of great for-profit companies that are so mission driven. And that
Right.
was something I explored. Was in my mind, I was like, I just want this to start as soon as it can. I just want it to exist. So, what's the path of least resistance that I can do? And so I
Right.
looked into like venture funding and other things. If it were a for profit, I looked into how I would fundraise if it were nonprofit. And ultimately, I was like, well, I can have the most control and I can just go figure this out if I make it a nonprofit. And that felt good to me. And that everyone could feel like there was no company or people trying to profit off of their symptoms and their side effects, like really
Yeah.
making it whole. It's my life's mission. It's what I feel I wish I had.
Yeah.
So I started a GoFundMe for it. So that's when I did use GoFundMe.
Awesome.
And yeah, and a friend of mine out here, luckily I'm in LA and I have a lot of really talented film friends and all that. And my friend Alicia came over and I just started talking. I didn't script any of it. I just started like spitballing this idea and we made the GoFundMe video out of it. And I was going to make the goal like 10 to 20,000, which I thought
Okay.
was a lot of money,
Yeah.
and start talking to friends like in tech and in web design, all this stuff. And they're like, Alyssa, like, you can't do a gift registry for that amount of money. And they're like, you need at least like 50 to 100,000 to like get started on something this robust. Cause it was really
Yeah.
important to me that you could register for anything. So like, we weren't
Okay.
just going to have like one API set up or one vendor. We weren't doing it in house. Like, you can register for literally anything on the internet.
Okay. Awesome.
And yeah, so I was going to do 10,000, and my friend Brian jokes now because he was like, yeah, I think you should do that and add a zero to it. And so I was like, okay. But I was like,
Yeah.
fair warning, I'm not in a position right now to be able to fail. Like, it will kill me
Yeah.
if I fail.
Right. Right. Right.
So I'm like, I'm going for it. But like, if we come short of that, like if we raised 30, 40,000, I would have felt like, oh, I got so much money. But I would have been like, we missed the goal by so much.
Yeah.
Needless to say, we launched it. We ended up raising 105,000 off the GoFundMe. And
Amazing.
it was what was so unbelievable about it was, of course, that like instantly we got started. We've created
Right.
this, I feel, in record time. Whereas if I'd gone the investment route, maybe in 5 years, something would have existed, if it ever existed at all.
Yeah.
And the proof of concept, like, of course, there's a certain amount of people who would just donate because they care about me and believe in what I'm trying to do. But there were a lot of people who started donating that I didn't know, who like saw it from other people. And I started realizing, like, okay, it's not just me. Like, it's not just cancer patients or survivors or thrivers. It's the
Right.
people who support them that want this too.
Yeah.
And that's when it all kind of changed for me of like, that's why this is so important. And so we've been
Absolutely.
fully funded up until now through peer to peer fundraising, fundraisers, and all that. I have more
Yeah.
of a team now, and it's not sustainable for me to run so many events per year. So we're starting to apply for more grants and trying to get more larger donors and things. But
Okay.
the way it's come together has been so bootstrapped, like community driven,
Yeah.
that it feels so good because I know that like it is like everyone is a part of it.
Absolutely. I was like, I mean, I've worked in like many corporate jobs and I've always just found like there's always like a mission statement at companies, right? And so you read those mission statements, but I never actually like felt aligned with them. And I think what you're doing, for example, like it sounds like everyone that's working there is like so into your mission and that's exactly what you want, right? You want everyone there to be like this is what my life's calling is and this is why I want to be here. And I think to your point it's like it's not just about if you yourself have cancer, like so many other people are touched by it, like whether it's family or friends. And I think all of us like if you don't have cancer yourself, like you know someone who has cancer. And so there's such a like wide group of people that are like mostly everyone is affected by this in some way.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
yeah, it makes me so grateful that I took the leap to get it started. It's still a leap. I mean, I don't pay myself.
Yeah.
And I've really prioritized just growing it. And, like you said, I mean, my team now, Amber, Sarah, and Jillian, who work with me, they care as much as I do. And that's so rare to find. And then the amount of endless volunteers and people involved. We did Not Dead Yet Fest, if you saw
Mhm.
that with Chelsea from Oh You're So Tough,
Yes.
and so many other nonprofits that we partner with. That's like what I was saying earlier. My career was always about partnerships. I mainly sold 401k, which it's important, but this is way more fun. But when I did 401k, all of my clients came through other financial advisors, referrals, CPAs, things like that. And it's essentially what I'm still doing now, is partnering with other nonprofits. Like for Not Dead Yet Fest, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, we're partners, Teen Cancer America, all these other great nonprofits that we can like team up and do great things, because we all do different things and we all have the same mission of helping the cancer community.
Yeah.
So all
Absolutely.
that has made it just like, I can't believe I get to work on it each day.
Yeah.
Like I feel
Yeah.
so grateful that it's what I get to do.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about like the user side. So, someone listening in wants to set up a gift registry. Like, what does that process look like for them?
If you go to wegotthis.org, right on the homepage, you can either find a registry or start one. If you scroll to the bottom, there's like videos walking you through it, but it's very intuitive. If you want to start one, you just hit start a registry, you sign up, and there's a couple ways that you can pull things in from websites. You could literally just copy and paste in the URL to the product that you want. There's also a grabber tool it'll explain how to use. But essentially, that's set up so that, like I said, any online retailer you can register for. A big thing that I've heard that I try to really reinforce, and I feel like is something we need to normalize, is a lot of people feel really comfortable registering for things like wigs or wheelchairs or barf bags, right? Like
Mhm.
things that fall into the stereotypes of cancer. But
Yeah.
like people want to help us. And I think it's really important that people also register for like date nights and
Yeah.
concert tickets. And, if you need funds for babysitters, you can utilize it just like a GoFundMe too. So you can link your
Right.
checking account to get donations directly to you. So it's kind of like everything in one spot. That money doesn't come to us at all. It goes directly to their account.
Right.
So register for anything you need. I highly encourage people to do all the things that will like make them more comfortable, bring them more joy. Like that's what keeps us living. And
Yeah.
then if you're on the supporter side, or if you're starting your own registry and you want to see what others look like, if you click find a registry, you can look in different areas. Like we could look near us in California, or things like that. You can
Yeah.
also search names. Or if you select let us find a thriver for you, it will randomly populate 20 registries every time that's clicked. So it's not
Awesome.
in alphabetical order or anything like that, because we don't want to favor any registry over another. But as long as your
Right.
registry is public, you'll pop up and you can see other scenarios. So like I've had my friend Jill from college, I was with her recently, and she was like, yeah, I looked on and like this girl lived not too far away from me, had like a handful of things in her registry. So I just like bought it all for her. And she's
Aw,
like, I felt like so good, and she
that's
got to
awesome.
like make, the few things that she needed. So
Yeah.
yeah, highly
I think
encourage
that's
people to
great.
use it.
I love that you're also encouraging it doesn't have to be something specifically for cancer. It can just be something in your life that, that would make you happy or that would be additive to your day to day. So I think that's really great. So I want to know a little bit about like what's the future? Like where do you see this like expanding into? Like how big do you want this to be?
Yeah, I'm not one to do things small. But yeah, I see it big. I see, big picture, it being a registry for the hard times, not just cancer. I try to
Yeah.
remind myself that Amazon started selling books. So, let's like perfect something and move forward with it. I just am almost done with my book. We finished the first draft of the manuscript for it. So I'm really excited about that. On a
Congratulations.
personal,
That's
thank
awesome.
you. So I'm actually launching pre-sales for that in October. I bet you can guess why.
Yeah.
It's a good month for people to listen. So I figured that was a good timing. I'm really, really passionate on a personal level of really my own personal mission of redefining success. So I really feel like redefining what it means to beat cancer is what I'm really living to do. And if we don't have a cure for metastatic breast cancer in our lifetime, getting to do what we do and live life and make the impact that we make, like, we're beating cancer every day. And I
Yeah.
hope that people know that, and not just people have it. It's not just cancer, right? Cancer, plug that in with any other thing that we go through in life. So the book and speaking and really spreading that message is a huge goal of mine over this time. I'm really doing that too, so that I don't need to pay myself through the nonprofit.
Yeah.
Rather have the corporations fund me so I can give everything back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then with the nonprofit and with We Got This, we from Not Dead Yet Fast. Since then, we've doubled in registries.
Wow.
And we have 1,000 registries now. I hope that that exponentially grows. My next goal is 10,000. Not going like 1, 2, 5. We're doing 10, and
Yeah.
um, I hope that people don't have to use it. But I know that a lot of people unfortunately do, and I really hope that this becomes the norm. Like, you get diagnosed, and while your husband's there breathing into a paper bag, you get this resource, that at
Yeah.
least can like make your lives a little bit easier and more comfortable and not make you feel alone. And the mission
Yeah.
statement, like you mentioned, our mission is building a community of giving and receiving that helps cancer thrivers and their supporters live their best lives. And it's not just about the gift giving, it's what that does.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing. And I think, if you're listening in and like you're looking for a way to support someone, like GoFundMe obviously is great, but like this is a really unique and specific opportunity to be able to help in this way. And I think that's really something that, you know, people should look into.
And something that's a little unique about us versus like if you have a GoFundMe, I mean, if you do, you can utilize the same features on our site. So you can take donations, but you can also register for any products and services you need, but also reach out to us and we'd be happy to promote your registry. So we do registries of the week, we promote them through our newsletters. A lot of times, nonprofits and other companies can't do that. It's just there's so
Mhm.
many GoFundMe's, but it
Right.
is our thing, so we can do it. So, feel free to email us anytime, info@wegotthis.org or message us on Instagram. And we would love to showcase. There's a friend, Megan, who I actually met her because I was doing a little giveaway for the Magic Castle. And it was for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which we're in. And we
Mhm.
had a child thriver win. And she messaged me and she's like, I'm the one with cancer. I have melanoma. And I was diagnosed the day that I found out I was pregnant. And she's like, my
Mhm.
son's been with me 100% of the way. He would love to go to the castle. And so I was like, I mean, I get chills
Of
talking
course.
about like, how was I going to
Yeah.
say no to that?
Yeah,
So
that's
we
amazing.
had a blast. We went, her and her husband and her son. It was amazing. And unfortunately, she's dealing with some new brain mets now and a
Oh,
recurrence.
no.
And we helped her out with setting up the registry and helped her husband did it with her, and her friend Katie, and who's My Melanoma World. If you follow her on Instagram, she's great, has great info. And we set that up. We put it as a registry of the week. We promoted it, and within the week, she got over $7,000 donated, and all the things on her
Amazing.
registry. And
Yeah.
it's just letting people know, those times are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those stories with us. And thank you so much, Alyssa, for being here. Your strength and drive is honestly so inspiring. And I'm so grateful for you for sharing your knowledge and insights with us today.
Well, likewise. Thanks so much for having me and for doing what you're doing and spreading awareness. It matters a lot.
Thanks for listening to The Other C Word, hosted by Bisma. New episodes drop Mondays. Connect with me on socials at Bisma, and let's all learn, grow, and inspire each other.